Welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast, where you'll find insight, analysis, and the story behind the numbers.
Hello, and welcome to Business Line's State of the Economy podcast. I am your host, Sanjana B. As technology advances, deep tech startups hold the key to transformation. But to unlock their full potential and achieve scale, they must navigate the landscape of international markets, investments, and regulations. In today's episode, we are joined by Naganand Doraswamy, the managing partner and founder of Ideaspring Capital, Ramkumar Narayan, the immediate past chair of nasscom Deeptech Council, Aditi Balbir, the founder of EcoRatings, and Abilash Soundararajan, the founder and CEO of Privasapien. Thank you, folks, for joining me today. I think we can get started, perhaps with the first question. What are some challenges that deep tech startups are facing when it comes to entering international markets? Mr. Naganand, perhaps you could take the lead.
Thanks for having us on the podcast, Sanjana, and happy to be here. In terms of international customers, I think we have all gotten very used to either IT services or now deploying SaaS products. And those have a different connotation and different mechanisms to sell. I think one of the key things that enable India to be fairly good in SaaS was the fact that deployment was completely democratized. So it didn't matter where you're deploying, which part of the world you're sitting, you're still deploying either on Amazon or a Google Cloud or Microsoft Azure. So I think that enabled us to sell quite effectively in all parts of the world. But I think when you enter the deep tech domain, we are going to face different set of challenges because the deployment and the sales process and also the usage will be very, very different across each company. And unless and until you get traction within the Indian market in selling the deep tech, it's very hard to go and sell outside. It'll take a lot more capital, a lot more people, a lot more convincing, and expect the sales cycle to be even longer for deep tech products. So I think we are in the very early stages of developing real deep tech products from India, and then starting to export them and trying to deploy them around the world will be a lot of learning for all of us involved in the ecosystem.
I think deep tech startups have one basic challenge, and that is that, we are used to a SaaS-driven economy, and we're used to an ERP-driven world, right? And when you have very new, very innovative solutions, then it's quite difficult to sort of convince the companies and to convince the world to move to the next version of technology. So I myself come from the Gen AI background, and one of the major challenges that we face is to be able to demonstrate the ability of our technology over the earlier version, which was the ERP driven world, right? So I think that's one of the key challenges, and I think, we are working towards solving it. A good way to solve it, obviously, is to go after the need of the company. But right now, real, pure, innovative technologies take a little bit time to demonstrate the efficacy. And it takes companies also time to adopt a new technology when they're used to a very different way of working, I would say.
Mr. Ramkumar?
So, Sanjana, I think we need to take a step back to understand what our landscape looks like before we get into some of the deeper discussions of what are some of the challenges in front of us. If you look at the market landscape, out of about 31,000 tech startups that exist in India, 3,600 of them, or a little over 3,600 of them, what we would characterize as deep tech startups. Now, within deep tech, there's a next level of further filtration. That is about 500 startups, which nasscom terms as inventive deep tech startups, which are essentially driven by fundamental research. So these are companies that are built around research that takes many years to develop and convert from research into products. But these have a lot of IP built into them, right? So they are fundamentally solving a very deep need in the market. And this could be anything from healthcare to agriculture to autonomous vehicles to anything else. But they're coming through with a very deep set of research that's backing that into getting it into market. So when you look at that landscape, there are a few things that come up that are some of the challenges that exist for them. First of all, I think that the way in both Naganand and Aditi pointed out, that they are driven around a very fundamental premise, so which is very different than what you're used to in the market from the past. SaaS is solving a business problem, or even product companies that existed before that were solving a very specific business need. These are solving a very fundamental need, which is beyond just business. Business is something that evolves from the IP that is generated by these companies. So there is a fair amount of work that is required for them to go from years of development before they get there. And in order for that, funding them becomes a challenge. What we would call patient capital, because most of and Naganand, of course, as a VC can talk to it a lot better than I can. But what we keep hearing from the market is a lot of this requires a very patient set of capital that needs to be available to these startups at the very early stage, all the way through the time when they actually have a product to take to market. And that gap can be several years, maybe in some cases almost a decade before that starts to exist. So creation of the patient capital pool needs to be available for these companies to draw upon and be able to take that forward. The second that exists is, once you have a product in the market, how do you get scale? And a lot of the areas that I just mentioned, and there are more, when you think about the deep tech domains in which these companies operate, the market acceptance is not a very quick thing. I mean, the market development needs to happen, where credibility for the product gets built, people use it, etc. And also how they get paid. It's not a recurring revenue model in many cases. In many cases, these are, if you think about, let's say, space tech, this is not something that is not like SaaS, right? Where you have a recurring revenue model, you get a subscription from somebody and you're building around it. So the business model that these companies have to operate in is very different than what many of us used to. And so hence the growth of these companies over time becomes, it has its own dynamics in terms of how it grows. The third is the supply chain required for a lot of these. And many of these are physical digital systems. They're not pure software in many cases. In which case, there is a whole value chain and a supply chain that needs to get built up. In many cases, those ingredients that are required to build a solution is not necessarily all available in this market. So there's a level of import and customs and dealing with a lot of things that they need to work with. If they're past all of this, then we are talking about scaling in the market, in which case they have to do a few things. They have to look for markets which are probably beyond India. Second is you need an IP framework where they can exert their IP in markets where that IP, the IP that they hold, the intellectual property that they hold, can be enforced. So these are some of the areas that we've been focusing on as an industry and an ecosystem in helping our deep tech startups establish themselves and grow in the markets, not just in India, but internationally as
well. Abilash?
I think great points put across by Ramkumar sir, Aditi, and Naganand. From a startup perspective, what I would say is when you are entering a international market or like different geographies, let's say US as a geography or Middle East as a geography, we'll have to identify for the problem that we are solving. We'll have to identify those innovators and early adopters. Given that it's a deep tech requirement, we have to identify those innovators who will trust in us, co-create with us, and invest in us, and make it as a win-win value proposition for them and for the startup. So we need to find people with those mindset who are willing to co-create with us, and it should be a value proposition also for them, and it should be aligned with our vision of building the product as well. Now, this is one of the fundamental challenges, and visiting those geographies is very, very critical to connect with those early innovative adopters. For example, recently we went for a InnoTrek along with NASScom, which is a very good initiative. We had done a similar initiative with Data Security Council of India as well, and we also attend some events. So our learning was that with just one visit it would not happen, but sustained investment from the startup in interacting with global customers who are primarily innovators and early adopters plays a very, very important part. That is number one. Number two is in terms of local presence. If you have a local partner, that will help significantly, because customer feels that it's very important for somebody locally to be available for him to address his pressing concerns. For example, time zone availability and things like those. Somebody should be available to take care of their requirements, and they should have that confidence, because if they are putting, let's say, 100K USD product, they want to ensure that it is backed by support whenever they want, and then referenceability in terms of trust. I think these three are like very, very important. These are not built in one shot. It happens over a period of time, but as we build this is what we are seeing that will empower a startup in getting into geographies of interest internationally.
Okay, thank you, Abilash. So, what strategies can these deep tech startups employ to secure global investments? Mr. Ramkumar, would you like to take the lead?
Yeah, I think so. I think Abilash touched upon this as well, right? As you look to start to enter new markets, you need to build your credibility in that market. So I think as an ecosystem, NASScom has this, you talked about InnoTrek. We've been doing this for over a decade now, where we help Indian startups get access to and visibility in the markets that they want to enter. We have done this for the Middle East. We were at GITEX last year, and I think we were in Saudi startup events this year. So I think part of this is how the ecosystem can help these startups collectively to actually bring them to the market. Of course, once they are introduced into the market or they get into the market, they have to build up their own credibility in the market. But how do we give an initial boost for them to enter some of these markets and be able to get there? Because once they are starting to build credibility in the market, it starts to they get discovered, and then then it makes it easier for them to raise follow-on funding from those markets if they actually need to do it, and so on, right? So I think as an ecosystem enablement exercise, we've been doing this. I think many of the we've been doing Emerge 50 as a cohort from NASScom for the last it's almost been about 18 years now. And Emerge 50 does a great job of helping us discover new startups in the market who can be taken forward. And last but not least is the event that's coming up, NASScom Future Forge, is being conceived as an event which is a celebration of our founders. And there's a lot of deep conversations that happen on the sidelines as well as on the main stage of the event in order for us to give that level of exposure and do that. So all of this need to happen. I think the funding is a result. It's not it's not an input metric, it's an output metric. And the output comes as a result of a whole bunch of things happening in the ecosystem to help these founders establish those.
Abilash, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah. So in terms of securing a funding or global investment, there are some very important challenges. It depends upon the the market. For example, US is more global in nature. And probably if you're raising funding from a Middle East VC fund, you need to have some local traction, which is very important. To some extent, it also goes with Europe. So these are, you need to have a specific kind of traction or technology when you pitch to different VCs, and VCs have different strategies, different theses in different verticals, and then they have different flavors. So especially when you are a deep tech, one of the very important things is what we have at least seen is that you need to connect to a VC who already has a thesis in your area of specialization. If you are speaking to a VC who does not understand your domain, then it's going to be a very surface level conversation. But when you have a deeper understanding and the VC already has a thesis or they have done investments in similar areas, that becomes a very important conversation, and then it can be a very fruitful conversation for both parties. So there needs to be some level of groundwork done by all parties involved. The VC should also scout for suitable startups. Startups should, when they are, let's say we are planning going to US, we have to ensure that we are connecting with the right kind of VCs who are interested in our area, or they are speaking about this domain or speaking about the technology, interacting or invested in some companies on similar lines. It's very, very critical. Having this understanding becomes very critical. And then traction, meaningful traction in the range of funding that we are planning to raise and a meaningful valuation, which we are looking at. Having these in place, having an understanding in a first place helps founders make the right ask, which at times is a very, very important challenge. Then if the ask is correct, then probably you have to do a justification of the multiple and then speak to the right VC who can come in at the right multiple. So having this broader perspective is important, and a lot of this you burn your fingers and learn, but ecosystems like nasscom has been empowering startups in this direction and then connecting with multiple VCs. So ecosystem play a very important role. Diaspora also plays a very important role, and existing investors also make good connections. This has to be thought through strategically and pursued by the startup founders.
For some industries, actually raising global funds makes a little more sense than raising money from India. The reason is that, in fact, Abhilash spoke about all the things that investors look for more in India, than globally. Things like traction, things like go to market, things like numbers. But when you're actually building through IP, when you're building product led innovation, and you have good clinical trials going on, or if you have some early validations, not successes but validations, then it actually might be easier for you to raise money globally than it is in India. In the US, typically, again, industries like mine, which are Gen AI focused, are, all the rage right now. So when you look at and when you talk to funds, that is the thesis that they are going with. And so more likely than not, they will give you the first meeting, right? Opening doors is very important. And like Mr. Ramkumar said, building credibility is huge. We've already done a great job where the country is concerned. So everybody believes the India story. Everybody believes, NASSCOM validated startups. So those sort of things also count a lot. Your previous work experience, if it is global in nature, or you are belonging to one of the colleges that are well known, of course, even the IIT IIMs are very well known now globally. Those things also make a lot of difference when you're fundraising. But essentially, and mostly the things are similar. When you're fundraising, mostly the things that investors look for are similar in nature. But I have always found that my conversations with VCs in the US bear purely on the product side, not on market entry or GTM, because it's very, very early. Imagine, ask Microsoft asking OpenAI that, okay, show me your numbers, right? So that doesn't happen. You actually look at pure technology, pure IP, and you invest, at least in the early stages, you invest basis that.
Sanjana, if I can add,
Please.
see, I think in India we have solved the problem of seed capital and pre-seed capital for deep tech investments. But I think we are long ways off in solving the Series A and Series B problems, right? Because if you talk to most of the US funds, they're not comfortable in investing in India domiciled companies for Series A. And we want companies to be domiciled in India. And then, it becomes the problems get exacerbated for deep tech companies, because we typically would want to build for India, be in India, and then transcend globally. So I think Series A, so seed and pre-Series A, I think we're all set. There are enough and more funds funding it. But I think we really, really have to solve the Series A and beyond problem. Because there are large funds have gotten very comfortable in investing in B2C companies and D2C companies. But there are not enough examples outside of what we have seen in the space tech of large funds outside of India coming and putting money into deep tech companies. And Series A is really hard. So I think we have some questions to be answered and some problems to be solved in the Series A and Series B beyond for deep tech.
Okay, noted. And how can strategic partnerships, enhance startups' abilities to scale internationally?
So I think that's a huge, huge plus. So if you are based in India, and if all the founders are based in India, right? There is no other option but to go for a partnership. Now, those partnerships can be different types. You could actually find a GTM partner for yourself, who can open doors to your Fortune 500 companies, which are likely the market for all B2B SaaS companies. And you can also look for strategic investors and partners. So for example, in our case, the big four consulting companies are strategic partners of ours, or channel partners, I would like to say. And they open doors to their clients, for the Fortune 500. But getting those conversations going is takes a good 1 year. It takes at least a year to close such a conversation. So those you can start working on the channel partnerships, but they take a little longer to close. I think GTM partners are great to begin with when you're exploring a new geography.
Yeah, strategic partnership is very critical, especially in a geography where you don't have presence. For example, let's say Middle East market. Um, it's very important to have, let's say, value-added distributors or system integrators, because Middle East is significantly a trust-centric market where partnership plays a very important role. There needs to be a local presence. So we need to connect with the right kind of partners locally. And then, for example, we have signed up a value-added distributor, and we have a couple of system integrators in Saudi and Emirates. So it enables to open doors with customers in those geographies, have good conversations, understand the local challenges, solve them, drive customer relationship at the right time. It becomes very, very critical. Then there are cloud partnerships where if you have a unique value proposition and then there is a good opportunity to collaborate. For example, we won Google for Startup Accelerator Program. We are selected out of 20 startups out of 1,000 plus startups in the country. And then we are working very closely with Google's product teams and other internal teams, and then putting things across, for example, let's say technical safeguards for Gemini and things like those. So technology partners and cloud partners can play a very important role and help you unlock value at different levels. Then, as Aditi mentioned, consulting partners. We won Accenture's Digital Core Challenge recently for TechNext Challenge. So it gives you some level of validation, and at the same time enables you to explore different use cases in different markets through the channel. Then regulators as well. For example, regulatory sandboxes can be a great place where you can showcase your capability, and then that can unlock this sort of not a direct channel, but sort of an indirect channel, which can give you great credentials in a market and enable you to provide services with some validation in the market. So these can be like very, very strategic.
Okay, got it. Mr. Naganand?
Yeah, so I think to add to what other panelists have said, two things are very important. One is trust. Second one is the cost of entering the market. I think startups like us that we fund from India will not have both when selling internationally. So having partners is an absolute must in these cases, because you neither have the capital nor have the trust, and that's the best way to get both.
Mr. Ramkumar?
No, Sanjana, I think the other panelists have covered it very well. It's all comes down to the strategy of the company in terms of how you want to proceed. Strategic partnership obviously plays a huge role when you're starting to enter new markets, and then building those out. And then it also depends on kind of business you're in, where you may need these partners to also have local context and local knowledge that they can bring to the table to help you. So I don't want to belabor all the points already made.
Right. Okay, got it. And how does, intellectual property rights contribute to the success of these startups uh, in global markets? Abilash, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. So IP, plays a very important role, to start with in terms of valuation of a startup, because it establishes, especially granted, if you have granted IPs, it provides a very strategic advantage in proving your value. And you need to have the right kind of IP strategy as well, like whether you are filing in India or you are doing a PCT filing, which is global in nature, and then filing in geographies of interest. That becomes very critical. And then getting these patents granted in various geographies also plays a very, very important role. You have to, and IP is primarily a defensive asset, where while large companies can use it as an offensive probably, but predominantly for startups, you cannot go behind a large company saying that you have abused my IP. So it is primarily for defensive purposes. So it has to be used appropriately, ensure it enables an organization to prove that they own their IP. And especially in the deep tech space, it is very, very critical, because tomorrow if somebody comes and sues you that, okay, this product you should not put in this market, it is very important that you have protection against this. And so funding and protection, these are the two critical areas. So we have filed around 15 patents, we have 3 grants. So this enables us in terms of value proposition, establishing our thought leadership in the market. So it enables organizations in a significant way. But some support in terms of government, in terms of international filing, things like those can be of great help. I know there are certain programs, but there are certain scopes of improvement which we are also working with nasscom. They are enabling us big time in exploring these areas.
Mr. Naganand?
Yeah, so I have a little different thought on this IP. I think first we have to build a product that sells, right? And then once you have a product, and then tech has to be a differentiator, and there's no doubts about it. But to me, IP and all will come and play a role when you want to protect yourself later on when somebody comes after you. So I think it is just a protective mechanism. You should it's definitely great to have IP. And you should file for patents to in the hope that it'll protect you if somebody comes after you or somebody copies you. But to me, the most important thing that I focus on when I invest in startups is like, have you used your IP to build the right product? So I would put a lot of emphasis on that, and in parallel fight for IP.
I think in certain kinds of industries, IP probably matters more than in others. If you are in drug development and healthcare, IP makes a big difference, because then you got to file it very early and be able to protect it. Because if the drug is popular, then it's too late for you to patent it once it's done. The challenge, however, that we have is that the IP management framework that we have, and the point that I think one of the other panelists made, you have to choose your jurisdiction carefully where you're filing your IP, because it needs to be protected, and you have to be sure that the IP protection mechanism in that market will indeed support you when you need it. So I think there is an important piece here in terms of both education, and IP filing is not cheap, right? Because if you're looking to file your patent in certain markets, it's like it's quite expensive for a early stage startup to be able to do that. So I think the founder or the founding team needs to be very carefully, in terms of both their choice of when they do it, as well as how they do it and where they do it. So that's one side to it. The other side to it is the education around this, right? That is required to make that decision effective. So developing a strong IP framework and education system for the ecosystem that actually helps founders helps them make that decision is also very critical, and that's needed for us. Today, the challenge is software patents are not enforceable in India patents. So things like that. So one of the things nasscom has been working on is to work with Indian government on how do we strengthen the IP framework and take that forward, and so on, and help with, at a larger policy level, be able to help our Indian startups with IP protection in other markets.
Yeah, everyone's made great points, and I think I go more with the view that IP just sort of helps you a little bit, and not too much, but a little bit when you're doing fundraise. In certain industries which are very competitive, or where you're afraid that a large tech player can come and sort of wipe you out. If you're building something, let's say something large, and where a large player could have an interest in, say for example, specific large language models, or domain specific large language models. I think their IP is important for sure, and it really helps you in the fundraise. I think that's the main point that I would go after. I don't know how much it helps you in defensibility and in business, in getting business. It's also the first time, by the way, that I'm ever filing a patent. So I don't know how it works, but I do know that if you tell investors that yes, we have a patent, they're happier. Let's put it that way.
Okay, got it. So thank you so much for joining today's conversation. Before we wrap, the conversation up, is there anything that any of you would like to add? Any closing remarks?
I can go. I think very exciting times for India in technology space, both Deeptech and product space, and Ram has been supporting this quite a bit, and I'm sure he'll be very happy to see where we are standing now. But all excited to and look forward to the next decade for India to become a good player in technology space.
No, I would concur with Naganand in terms of, we have come a long way. If we look back over the last 10, 15 years, There's been an immense amount of progress in terms of technology startups and the rest of the ecosystem that's developed around it, in terms of the investors, the mentors around these companies, the people who bring domain knowledge to help the companies and the founders succeed, and then of course the founders themselves who have been able to take their vision and actually convert that into products that are winning the world. So we're very excited. I think the next decade, 2 years ago when we looked at the deep tech space, there was hardly any AI, and that of course changed in November of 22. With OpenAI kind of bringing it mainstream. But today, I don't think it's very difficult to find a company that is not utilizing or at least talking about utilizing AI for their solutions in many different ways. So this world moves very fast, and the companies that are able to pivot and stay nimble and be agile, and an ecosystem that can support it is always a winning proposition. And we're very excited about the next decade ahead.
I'd just like to say that from the other point of view that I'm very happy that India's ecosystem is supporting the deep tech startups. To be very honest, 10 years ago, this ecosystem was not this strong at all. I was a founder 10 years ago as well. And the type of, credibility that is being lent to such startups by the ecosystem is very valuable for us, because we are competing with the Microsofts of the world and with OpenAIs of the world, right? So being, at this stage of our startups, it's very, very valuable for us to go for programs like InnoTrek and to get validated by investors and by, people from our own community. So I'd just like to thank nasscom for that.
I think the amount of exposure that we are getting, we have been in play for almost 4 years now, is significantly higher even for in terms of startups who are starting now. The ecosystem, as Aditi was also mentioning, and thanks to the efforts of likes of Mr. Ramkumar and Naganand, that we have a thriving VC ecosystem, at least at the seed stage and pre-series A stage. We have a great collaboration ecosystem, let's say nasscom DSCI. We have good Indian ecosystem in US, Middle East, where people are willing to bet on Indian startups, and people are becoming more confident in terms of technology coming out of India. So it's a very, very positive ecosystem globally, and I think Make in India for the world is very much possible.
And with that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much, folks, for joining today's conversation. I think it was very insightful and there were a lot of perspectives. Thank you. Thank you for the contribution.